remember being invited by Humphrey Barclay, who you may remember at London Weekend Television, ITV, you know, when I was first, you know, just after I'd left Oxford, really, and he asked me to write an essay on what kind of comedy programme I would like to be involved with. And it was all tremendously pretentious stuff about the fact that, you know, there shouldn't be a studio audience, and it should all be very, you know, it should all be shot on location and shot on film, you know, desperately trying to, you know, to get away from the traditional, simple sitcom or sketch show format that was, you know, popular then as now. And of course, in the end, it was largely, you know, ambitious but pretentious waffle. I mean, sometimes, you know, when, you know, merely trying to be original merely because you learn to be different, you know, doesn't always, well, rarely works, actually. I mean, sometimes it can work, but actually if you just, you know, try and learn from the past rather than reject it outright, can be more beneficial. Oh gosh, yes. Well, I remember, you know, reading the scripts for the first time and them reading like a delightfully sort of, you know, cozy feel to them instead of the extreme scale and ambition of the first series, which was, you know, worthy. I think in its way it was a worthy thing to have done and experimented with, but there was always this feeling. Well, you always hoped it was going to be funny rather than you believed it was going to be funny. There was always, which was a bit nerve-wracking for everyone, you know, not least the actors.
I think part of the difficulty was that trying to be funny wasn't really what we were about in the first series. We were awfully arrogant, really.
Yeah, no, it was the usual, absolutely, you know, pretentious, you know, bluster, you know, formed quite a large part of it, I think. No, it is hugely ironic that having set about to make the first series of the Blackadder as unlike Fawlty Towers as we could, by the time we got to the second series and had completely rejigged it in the way that it was, we did end up with 3 sets, you know, and something quite claustrophobic and hierarchical. So in many ways, we sort of learned the lesson of our ways, that actually our outright rejection of the traditional sitcom form, you know, was not.
There are good reasons for it, aren't there? I mean,
yeah, there are good reasons why sitcoms tend to have the shape that they do. It made a tremendous difference. It was just a joy, you know, to have real people in the room and to be recording it like a theatre show. Really, you know, we did, you know, rehearse it all week, and then we put on a show for 2 hours. Admittedly, only, you know, half an hour of program came out the other end of it, but it felt like what it was, a live performance. And people even now actually are rather surprised when you tell them that you had a studio audience for the second, third, and fourth series. They, you know, they just assumed that either an audience had seen it later, had seen it afterwards, or that it was canned, or that it was dubbed onto the soundtrack, when in fact it wasn't. And even though when I look at the Blackadder now, which I don't do very often, but when I have seen episodes, I can see, you know, moments when I, you know, stammered a bit, or the pause is a bit too long, and you think, God, how frustrating really that we sort of did it on the hoof, and we might do one retake but only one. And how much better it would have been if we'd got every little pause and every little inflection absolutely right, in a sort of filmic way of doing take after take after take, which we didn't do. And yet, you know, you have to pay that price for slight inconsistency and slight errors and fault lines in order to get the energy and the feel and the joy of a live performance. And in the end, we, you know, I think it was probably a sacrifice worth making. But I can, you know, you can see, I can see now when I do watch it, you think, oh, I'm sure I could have said that line better. Oh dear, you know, Tony came in too early. I wish we'd. But in fact, that was it. That's what it was. You know, you just had to live with the way it was. It's all really about the character of the Blackadder, where the comedy, where the inherent comedy of his situation is rooted, because basically he's a bright and able man, and yet, you know, things go wrong for him in a way that we try to make funny. But you know, he wasn't a buffoon, or he didn't. I suppose he just tended to overthink things, didn't he? To outthink himself, or maybe it was just bad luck. In the end, he's just unlucky. And of course, you know, fatally, he always allies himself with Baldric. It's strange, that interreliance. You'd think someone as bright as the Blackadder wouldn't spend any time that he had to, you know, with Baldric. And yet he does. There's a strange interreliance. It is like Basil Fawlty and Manuel. You know, why doesn't he just sack Manuel? Well, there's some way in which they need each other. And the Blackadder and Baldric need each other, not only for the sake of, you know, to allow us to make the jokes about him, but about them, but you know, there is an interreliance there again.
I've got this theory. The reason that people love it so much is because of Baldric, because he's every man, he's us.
Yeah.
Do you think there's anything in that?
Well, he's a pretty dim version of every man. I'm not sure I'd like Baldric to represent me in the sort of canon of human existence. but I can see how he certainly has a very, you know, he has an attitude to life which is uncorrupted by expectations or class structures or education or anything. He just takes things, or deodorant, that he just takes things at face value and deals with them as he finds them, and it's very, very enjoyable. Yeah, I can see it how that he has a very straightforward attitude. You know,
but he's also lovable. You wouldn't really call Blackadder lovable sort of almost ever, would you?
No.
Whereas,
well, no, and you know, I mean, the Blackadder is a pretty relentless cynic. Although you see, in my opinion, like all the best sitcom characters, pleasingly two-dimensional. You know, pleasingly simple, always the same. You know what I mean? You don't feel at the beginning of any episode of the Blackadder that the Blackadder's learned something from the 3 previous episodes. You know, you just know that he's going to have his same old sarcastic, careworn, you know, attitude to life. And that's very reassuring, which is a problem. I think it would have been a huge challenge and difficulty if we'd ever tried to make a movie of the Blackadder, because in movies, you know, characters are supposed to be 3-dimensional, and they're supposed to, you know, realize the error of their ways and change and develop, and you know, they're different at the end of the movie as to how they were at the beginning. I mean, you know, maybe we could have contrived a conceit which would have got round that, but in the end, I think the Blackadder is like, you know, Basil Fawlty or anyone comparable, is a sitcom character par excellence, and would have been very, very difficult to translate into any other medium. You know, particularly a 90-minute lump of entertainment like a film. I think it would have been very tricky. I mean, what's been pleasing about the Blackadder in many ways is this feeling, you know, in the 25 years since we first started doing it, it does seem to have a longevity in the audience's eyes. Of course, its period nature helps that. The fact that there's nothing really to date it in people's eyes. There isn't a 1970s sofa or wardrobe or political attitude to, you know, to sort of sully the waters. In the end, you can just enjoy it for what it is. Even though actually, at least some of the, you know, some of the comic attitude of the Blackadder is the fact that he was a 20th century man, really put in a period situation, wasn't he? He didn't really accurately reflect, or necessarily, you know, his time. He definitely had the attitude of a modern audience placed in a period context, and that, I think, you know, engages the audience and gives it an extra sort of satirical sort of tone to the whole series. I think that helps. Well, I do have a problem with the letter B. I do, yeah, quite often when B is followed by a vowel, bubble was. I remember at school, my schoolmates getting a lot of amusement out of getting me to say the word bubble, and me going, stammering a bit. And I remember the one we had trouble with was a Battersea Dog's Home, wasn't it? A Battersea Dog's Home, which we had a problem with in the live recording in front of the audience, and I just couldn't say. But I'm having difficulty saying it now. Battersea Dog's Home was what I was saying.
And then I said, say Crufts instead.
Yes, and of course, and I got the word down from the control room that I should say Crufts, which is what I did. And of course, it got this huge and totally disproportionate audience response, an absolutely astronomical laugh, because they loved the fact that I'd finally found a way round the stammer. But of course, then that laugh had to be taken out, because otherwise it would be completely incomprehensible to the listening and viewing audience. Yeah, so that Crufts. It was a stroke of genius from John. But Bob wasn't. Bob wasn't an issue. For some reason, B followed by a vowel and then another consonant and nothing else after it. Bob is fine. I can say Bob as much as you like. I don't have a problem. Whereas bobble, like a bobble of wool, that I would have more of a problem with.
Did Richard deliberately? There was one in the Mr. Ploppy episode, wasn't there? Bibble. That just said that people
Bibble,
put a bucket on their head and say bibble.
And say bibble, yeah.
You don't have a problem with bibble either, do you?
I can't remember. If I try and say it now, that I do have a problem with it actually, but bibble and say bibble. Bibble. Yeah, it's a mystery. It's a mystery. Well, with the second series, really, we started to establish the repertory company, didn't we? Of not only a sort of claustrophobic and dramatic setting, but also quite a small and neat group of people who had a lot of natural creative empathy with one another, which continued until the end.
How did you find Miranda to work with? Because it's a...
Yes, well, great, as I recall. I mean, she was, but despite being a very good actress, she seemed very willing to muck in, because she did effectively become a member of the repertory company, didn't she?
Definitely, yeah.
And she returned on a number of occasions. But she had such a sort of brave and eccentric, creative curiosity to her that it meant that she didn't really care what she did or how she did it. She was just going to enjoy exploring all the possibilities. And that's where that Elizabeth thing came from. It was so interesting in the end, what she did and the way she did it. I thought Rick was great. I loved the fact that actually it was entirely complementary to the attitude of the Blackadder. It seemed to me that the two worked fantastically well together. I remember being asked by a number of people, don't you find it rather annoying that Rick Mail comes in, and is extremely funny and appears to, steal some of your thunder, but because I've never really, viewed any acting job, except perhaps Mr. Bean, I suppose, as being a singular thing where all or virtually all the comic investment should be in one particular character. In the end, the better everyone is, the better everyone looks. You know what I mean? It's like, I remember being at a dinner party with an actor who was making a very honest pitch for the idea that it's much better to be by far the best performer in a drama or in a program, and for everyone else to be rubbish, and then you can really shine, in comparison to other people. And it seemed to me to be such a ludicrous way of looking at things, that if other people aren't good, you are never going to look good. You know, no matter how good you are, you know, it is a, you know, you are very much interreliant. Yeah, it did seem to get more difficult as we went on. I think my overriding, you know, memory of the whole of the Blackadder canon was of it being stressful and satisfying. That's how I remember it. Well, you know, it was good having, you know, so many, you know, writers in the room, apart from the writers themselves, who were not in the room. Which, of course, but what did it result in? Yeah, I remember it being intermittently hilarious, I think is how I might describe it. But I remember long periods in which it was really not very funny at all. You know, when we got in, you know, when either individuals or as a room we just got in a bit of a slump,
Yeah.
or grump, and it was sometimes very difficult to drag us out of the ditch.
Well, this is the plague village. I wonder where we're going to see that.
Yeah,
I
like
had
a
a
real
riding lesson. I didn't know that.
like a real movie set, it says here.
Yes.
Which is quite a funny thing to say about a real movie set.
Yeah, it's true. I suppose that's the thing, but one has a sense that one
Well, the other thing is
was
that
playing at it.
yeah, exactly. It gives the impression of your kind of inexperience, really, and your kind of wonder, really,
Yeah.
at the fact that the whole thing is happening,
Yes.
and the mechanisms and processes that are going on, which are relatively unfamiliar to you.
Well, I was completely out of my depth.
Yeah, that's another way of putting it.
Do you like having a haircut? Do you
Like it? No.
hated it?
It was pretty difficult, you know, buying Mars bars for several weeks, having to sport that haircut. Well, it was very bleak. I mean, I remember it being you know, genuinely Northumbrian winter weather of the mid 20th century, being very cold, snowy, and not like today. Yeah, I just remember the sort of, just the sense of sort of difficulty of everything, wasn't it? I mean, the sort of scale of what we were trying to do, and the number of animals and children and extras, and, you know, most of whom you felt had a slightly miserable couple of weeks.
Well, it definitely felt out of control, didn't it? That was the thing.
Yeah.
Is that you? I didn't feel. I was the producer. I didn't know about all these dogs and braziers and things. Somebody made all these executive decisions at some other level.
Yeah, I did. I just remember a feeling of us not quite knowing what we were doing. That snow-covered was where, I'm fairly certain, was where the horse reared up.
Yes, so
and
the
I fell off the back.
Yes, that's right.
Well, what I say, I fell
One
off
of
the
your
back.
people
Yes.
fell off the back.
Yes, one of
Who
my
was it
representatives.
actually? Was he a stunt person?
Yes, it certainly was a stunt person, but I can't remember which.
But you did some of the riding there, didn't
Yeah,
you?
the riding I enjoyed. I learned to ride, you know,
For this?
for the first series. I was taught by a member of the Swedish Olympic equestrian team, who was a fantastic rider and a very nice man, but of course completely out of his depth. I mean, you know, he was being forced to paddle in the shallow end instead of the deep end where he was more at home. And I was, I went there for weeks and weeks and weeks, and learned a little bit. And then I learned a huge amount within 2 days of encountering the real horses that we used, and the woman who came with the horses, who of course was tremendously used to making
Actors look all right, yeah.
you know, actors look good. And then I suddenly started to find a confidence with it. Since which time I've hardly ridden at all. Hardly ever ride.
Was it your masterwork, Ro?
Well, certainly not my masterwork. I may be part of a shared work which is done very well. Yeah, sorry, there I'm a bit stuck for words.
Well, it is fun. I do think one of the hallmarks of it is that it seems better than one remembers it. On the odd occasions I do see it, you think, gosh, this is actually quite good. It's kind of slightly embarrassing that it's...
Yeah,
it's,
no, and it is, you know, and it did, you know, it was representative of a moment in all our lives. That, you know, that's why I think it's very, you know, it's sort of futile really to talk about reunions or a fifth series or anything like that, because I think it represented a comedy consensus, you know, between a group of individuals at a certain time in their lives, and as soon as you talk about, as soon as you try and recreate that chemistry 5 years later or 10 years later or 30 years later, it's very, very difficult. When we were filming here, it was the first time I'd ever met a camp Geordie. We had a dresser, you know, who looked after my clothes and wardrobe, you know, and during my childhood here in the northeast, I just remember, you know, the Geordie accent was the one that, you know, men spoke, you know, it had a natural kind of, you know, masculinity about it, you know, and suddenly you heard this man who was talking like that, the most unusual tone. It was a very, very...
Go on, give us a what did he talk about then?
Well, I can't remember, you know, just what dresses I do talk about, you know, just things that are quite, you know, had nothing to do with, I can't remember. I'm sorry, I can't remember. I mean, the main thing I remember about the wardrobe was the cod piece, or the cod pieces. I remember we had increasingly ludicrous cod pieces, and trying to decide which was the best compromise that wasn't so lewd that your eyes were glued to it, you know, rather than the face of the actor the entire time when it was in the shot. And we compromised on something which actually now, when you look at it, looks still fairly extraordinary. I mean, you know, I'm not sure that you'd want to do that kind of thing now or today. No, I think in the end we were over-ambitious and slightly pretentious in our approach. So Michael Grade was right, really, to cancel the series.
He was. Well, we got smacked for it. We learned our lesson, but...
Yeah. But we'd already learned the lesson before they cancelled it. That was what was
that, I think,
frustrating.
is right.
Yeah, I just think that the Blackadder represented a particular comedy consensus between a group of creative individuals at a particular time in their lives, and it worked extremely well. And it was just a wonderful fluke, really, that it did work so well. You know, I mean, you may say, well, you know, there are lots of talented people involved, so it was bound to be good. But as we know, that's no guarantee of success whatsoever. You know, we were just very lucky to find ourselves all together at a certain time, which was basically the 1980s, wasn't it? It was a child of the 80s, really, the Blackadder. You know, and it worked very, very well for us all. Okay. Thank you all.